Giancarlo Ferrara, and I collaborate with Polaris, and I collaborate with Gabriele and many other projects. Also with the website that we have launched 3 months ago, which is the name is Cultura Europa. We would like today to examine, uh, to analyze what has happened in these recent months after the COVID-19 pandemic, and which effects this pandemic will have in the near future, especially related to the globalization process. We've used these months in order to try and underline which are the trends that probably we will face in the near future. One of them is, let's say, on the birth of this pandemic, what has happened really, which is yet, of course, very uncertain for the moment. But what is quite clear is that this pandemic was well known in certain circles, at least from the fall of last year. An example is that in January 2020, the Italian government subscribed an agreement with the Chinese health authorities, which had inside some measures in order to face pandemic event, which was not really, of course, clear what it was, but in January it started, actually it already started in December in China, so it was quite easy to understand what was going to happen. For instance, in Italy, for 2 months, all this has been completely underestimated. Life went on as ever. There was no problem in gatherings and moving, and all happened in one weekend. Actually, the last weekend of February, when in the north of Italy, especially in the cluster in Lombardy, many people started to die. But apart from this, what we would like to underline that this pandemic has led to a new governance which we would express as a health dictatorship. That means that the health problem, of course, is very central, of course, in the minds of all the citizens. This has been also amplified with fear. We've had mediatic coverage which was really exaggerated in Italy. I don't know if it was the same in other European countries, but from morning to late at night, all televisions were concentrated on giving the impression that absolutely the situation was out of control. Hospitals were full. People were starting to die in hundreds. And all this has been going on for 2 months. Lockdown measures stepped in, very rigid lockdown measures. People have been kept inside for 2 months without having only a chance to go and buy food shops and not even to walk in parks. And this fear has led to more control. We're not concentrating on the traditional control. I mean, control of possible social or political unrest. The control here is more sophisticated. The fact that app on mobile phones has been launched, the fact of DNA mapping is now on the agenda. The fact that in the next month, a vaccine, which sees many groups competing in order to have this multi-millionaire business. One of the groups, of course, is Bill Gates group. All this has led, of course, to a control One of the guidelines has been the Health World Organization, okay, OMS, which has given the guidelines to many governments. And it's not a case that after Italy, in many countries, the lockdown has been adopted. Even in countries where, like in the UK, where Boris Johnson, the start of the pandemic, was very, defiant on this, but then he also had to adopt some lockdown measures. Lockdown, of course, has not been the same in all European countries. There's been some graduation, very strong measures probably in Italy and France, less strong in the Nordic countries like Sweden and Norway. But in the end, this has led to a completely different governance. I mean, probably the world will not be the same as it used to be, or better, the trend of globalization as we see it has been reinforced by this pandemic. Somebody says that this is a stop to or halt to globalization. We think it's on the contrary, because all this has led to new behavings, new social behavings, new ways of well, social is a very strong word because actually it's a completely antisocial behaviors that are coming into place. And also in the way you go around, you shop, and you work. Let's just think of the massive employment of telework from home. Millions of people now are working from home and not going to their offices. And this, for instance, together with a more increase of digitalization of means of work, means a huge amount of money which is saved by companies, for instance, and this will lead, of course, to a more massive increase of telework in the next and in the coming months. There's already a great debate on how to legislate on the telework or smart working and other forms which are working from distance. So this has also led to a very heavy economic crisis, which is not so much a financial crisis as it used to be Lehman Brothers crisis in 2008. This crisis is really getting hold of the small and medium enterprises and on many jobs which are not, of course, for instance, in Italy, a lot of restaurants, bars, and other small shops are not ready yet to open because the cost is huge and the money they will earn if they open. And this has hit small and medium enterprise all over Europe. Just to stay in Europe, of course, not to go in other world areas. The result has been a big debate on how to try and recover from all this. There's been a big debate at the national level, at the European level, recovery fund, SME, and other ways of giving injection of liquidity to the enterprises. But still, the damage we reckon is it will be long term, and it will be very difficult the way we can recover. On the other hand, this could also be an opportunity in the sense that this pandemic has shown, of course, the rivalry between the US and China, which are still going on in, let's say, giving one another the guilt of the origin of this virus. China and USA, of course, are so powerful economically and from a military point of view that they will probably use the opportunity, probably China better than the US. And we will go back to the US because the unrest that we are following during these days in the United States is very much related, we think, to the next presidential elections. So it's very much an internal question matter, but as every US internal matter, it has consequences on the rest of the world. But the big chance is also for Europe. And when we talk about Europe, we talk about the engine of Europe, and that is Germany in some ways, because Germany has launched a vast plan of recovery, not only at national level, but also trying to mediate between the member states at European level on, let's say, help the countries which have been hit most, Italy and Spain, so the southern countries. You well know that there's been a big debate which has seen Nordic countries, for instance, Netherlands, and other countries from the north, like Sweden, oppose to having money employed for the recovery of the south. With the problem, the issue was, we are not going to pay for the debts of Italy or Spain or other countries which have a very high level of public debt. Germany has mediated in some ways, and nowadays it seems, even if the form is not very clear, that the recovery fund is going to be a reality, and the massive intervention of the European Central Bank will also give an injection of liquidity in order to tackle the crisis. The problem, of course, is how this money will be employed. Because if this money is employed in order to have new investments and in order to do all the reforms that we need, for instance, at Italian level, in order to have a more a less pervasive public administration, less bureaucracy, a more digitalized economy, a more fast way of producing, and this is caused part of the consequences of the pandemic. That will be one point. On the other hand, if it will be employed in order to keep on distributing money, especially in aiding, let's say, regions which are not favored, this will be a big problem. Because another consequence of the crisis is surely a gap, the widening of the gap between the rich and the poor, especially the middle and petit bourgeoisie, which is employed in small and which goes on with small and medium enterprises is heavily has been heavily hit. Till now, there's no real great reaction apart from sporadic protests, which are not going anywhere because there's no direction, no proposals. There's only a request really to reopen up and have money in order to open up. But in next month, all this will be a real drama because the money which has been allotted to make things a start will finish, and then we will have to see how this, at least at the Italian level, all this will be tackled by the government. So we have let's say, in our view, we have a multipolar, asymmetric picture. And the picture is, of course, very, very complicated because, as we said before, the pandemic is still not finished, even if its peak in Europe is lowering. There's many calls of a second wave, which will arrive in the fall of this year of COVID-19. But all this is just a guess. There's no really evidence about this. And in this picture, Europe and Germany can play a role if they play the cards well, of course, and if they do not follow probably the US on their path. From what we see, the last months has been some declarations of autonomous position from Ursula von der Leyen and from Chancellor Merkel in order to be more autonomous from the US. We will see if this will be the case. Maybe Europe will try and play more on the Chinese side in order to have more strength towards the US in the near future. On this, I go back to the US because the unrest we are witnessing in these days in the United States after the killing of the Afro-American Floyd is to us as two different meanings. One meaning, as I said before, is all internal in US policy, and in US, let's say, never-ended tackle between Obama administration, what was the deep state which followed Obama, now probably is behind John Biden, and the Trump trying to be re-elected. And all this has been, let's say, instrumentalized in order to have a big unrest. But we'll have to see who will gain from all this, because I'm not sure that the Democrats will gain something, especially if situation should go out of hand, as has already happened in cities like Seattle and Minneapolis. On the other hand, of course, all this, as usual, coming from the States, has had a consequence also in Europe. You see that in London, Paris, in a smaller proportion in Rome, there's been also manifestations which are, let's say, linked to Black Lives Matter. And but we see that all these rallies have ended in the riots, disorder, which probably will not help the cause of the sympathy of Black Lives Matter, I think, in the end. So it should be an own goal in this regard. What is also interesting to notice is probably that all this will lead to a more concentration of power in the elite's hands. We have witnessed, for instance, in Italy, the fact that the parliament has been completely overpowered by government. Actually, if the parliament had been shut down for 3 months, nobody would have noticed, because the government decided with the decrees which were written in one day and presented late at night by the Council of Ministers. We don't see any sign of elections at the moment, but the real problem is probably that this pandemic has shown that post-democracy means that democracy is going to be more and more concentrated and have more and more decisional power without the traditional representative channels. That means that parties, parliaments, and in some ways also states will have to deal with emergency measures more and more, even in the future, and that the decisions will be taken by very, very small elites. For instance, in Italy, we've had massive presence of virologists and health specialists, which really dictated the line to the government, which seemed to us that had no clue how to move. And so small number of people really decided what was the line of the government. That brings us to which could be our positioning in all this. Our positioning would be on some level the same. I mean, what we need now is to create elite. We cannot answer to elite policies with the traditional means of activism, protest, which are okay. They are absolutely have very good and sound reasons. but they're not. If they're left alone, they do not make much sense. We should keep on, as we have done in the last years, creating elite which can elaborate pressure and lobby, especially in the intermediate corps of society, in order to affirm a different view and a counterpower towards the elite, the globalist elite, of course. That means that we should push to have autonomous power, countervailing power, especially with all those sectors of the productive sectors which are being hit by the crisis, trying also to have a mutual aid, cooperative aid between people who actually are, and give them this a political direction. So to create a model which can, let's say, in the medium and long term, try to compete with the new challenges that we are facing with this new phase, which is a completely new phase, and we should be able to tackle it with not with traditional means, but with new means. Io avrei terminato.
Eccomi, di già?
Sì.
Okay, so Giancarlo finished. So write please your questions. Aspetta, vediamo se ci sono domande. Sì, lascia il tempo che serve un po' di tempo che lo faccio. In any case, I go. Just for remember.
Un po'.
If dice Camille, if there is a possibility that this virus crisis will lead to radicalization of society in Europe.
It's difficult question. It's a difficult question to answer because, of course, as all crises, it could lead to radicalization of society. But I think that the problem that they have played the card of fear is a very powerful tool. And what we have seen is that the absolute majority of people have obeyed to orders coming from the government in a great part, because the fact that this society is not ready to be contaminated, and the fact that you use this tool in order to terrify people is very powerful, and then there's no really there's no conscience of how to radicalize on which basis. Actually, I don't know if it's true, but the government here, which has been absolutely incapable of dealing with the situation, has been seen by parts of citizens, a big part, as at least the mother which will lead you out of the crisis. Sento un rumore terribile.
Non so, fammi vedere se c'è qualcuno che c'è.
I don't think for the moment any radicalization really, apart from minorities, political minorities. But this this does not mean that society is going to radicalize. At least in Italy, of course, I cannot judge in other countries, but I don't see signs of radicalization. No.
One for Camille. I've read Politico that this big financial plan prepared by Germans will lead to creating a EU superstate. It is possible. Do you think that this is similar in any way to Marshall Plan?
Well, for the moment, I do not see any EU superstate. I see Germany leading, of course, a process. This is a slightly different thing. Yes, they're trying to lead, and I think that this is quite normal, because if you don't tackle the crisis in order to go ahead, you can only go backwards. So, of course, Germany is trying to lead this process also because between US and China, if Europe does not try and find a common way, and whatever it is, it will be very difficult for Europe to really exist as it is, because single countries, we have seen, and this was, let's say, again, another proof, they're not capable to face any big problem on their own. And this is clear to everybody. I mean, even to the people who are, like, they call themselves sovereignists in Italy. Well, apart from crying some slogans, I've had to accept that if the European Union, and especially Germany, does not ignite liquidity and especially the European Central Bank, well, Italy on its own will collapse. There is no way that they can face such a crisis on their own. And we're talking about Italy, which is still a big country in Europe. It's a third or fourth, let's say, economy in Europe still, even in a crisis. One thing, I don't see any similarity to the Marshall Plan because the Marshall Plan was, yes, an economic plan, but there was also U.S. military army, which was in Europe and still is in many parts of it, and so that gave more strength also to the economic side, I would say.
Senti, ho fatto una considerazione, se la vuoi leggere o magari spiegarla.
Yeah, Gabriele just wrote, there will be great transformations in international relations and Europe will probably gain ground. There will be enormous transformation on the energy and economic fields. High social costs will be paid. A qualified minority must be prepared to create organizational, social, and political and economic alternatives, but by accompanying the European affirmation process, not by contrasting it. Yes, it's what I said before. Europe has a good chance. The way to gain is the way they will play their cards, of course. High social costs, of course, undoubtedly. I mean, many jobs will disappear, and many people will pay high consequence on this crisis and will be losing their jobs. Also, because this, of course, is the consequence of digitalization and robotization, which were already on the ground before, will be massively employed, especially after this crisis. Qualified minority, yes. I mean, either you create an organization and try to find political and economic alternatives, but in a European perspective, of course, and we have to accompany the process for the moment. There's no other alternative that I can see in realistic terms. For the fact I said before, nobody will tackle the effects of this crisis on its own, and the only way is to try and say inside on this process and try to gain more ground that you can.
C'è Irene che ha scritto una cosa subito dopo di me.
I believe we should not expect changes which can control.
Legge, I believe you should not expect.
Uh-huh.
Beh, leggilo, gli altri no.
But I believe we should not expect a change of society which we cannot control, neither by numbers nor by influence. Radicalization can come only by the Muslim minorities who are ready to fight to acquire more rights and have everything to gain and nothing to lose. Unlike the indigenous people who will try to save all they can, and that does not call for deployment but for introspection. What we can expect and try for is for us to adapt our ideas, language, and program to address people questions. Or something. Yes, I agree. I completely agree. I said before that I don't see any sign of radicalization. If we're talking about masses or people, where people really exist, people are terrified to lose what they have. They're not absolutely ready to go forward anywhere. I share completely your view, Elena, because the fact is that they're all trapped by the fear of the future. And when you're trapped by the fear of future, in health terms, in terms of losing your job, in terms of using your money and what you had until now, it is very, very difficult that they will react. Again, Elena, I totally agree with Gabriele. More Europe, not less. Yeah, for instance, it's the debate in these days. It's really an example of what's happening. If Europe is pushing forward liquidity to inject in the system, and in many countries, sovereign parties say no because they don't want to, let's say, give a hand to other countries. This is absolute boomerang. And it's not really, even from a nationalistic point of view, it's not a good view to see. Another is what topics should be on our political agenda in connection with coronavirus pandemia, where we should be focused the most as members of different groups. C'è un rumore terribile nell'orecchio.
Non capisco da che dipende, forse dalle cuffie, che te devo dire?
Okay, but
Se vuoi spegni il mio di microfono, che è l'unico che è acceso.
Well, we should work on many levels. I think we should work on cultural level first of all. That means also in emphasizing what we mean by Europe, what Europe is, and not only talking about Europe in terms of economy and how much money the European Central Bank is going to spend in Europe, or not only on a monetaristic or economic point of view. We should also be focused on trying to, as we said before, organize the forms of protest of the productive sectors and people which are hit by the crisis, but not only by asking for money, of course, as I see nowadays, some groups are just mobilizing a few people, really, I would say, in saying, well, where is the money to restart? Why are you not giving us the money, at least in Italy? And with no radical approach. There's no way they are going to, for instance, tell the people that the problem of our crisis is also the problem of a political class which has failed for at least 50 years, not only because there's been COVID-19, but because they made the wrong choices, and the system in Italy, as it is in other European countries, it's very focused on corruption, on the fact that the parties are invading the state, and have been, let's say, occupying the state more than being the state. If this crisis grows to super crisis, then it's a possible geopolitical situation change. I mean, it's possible, for example, in Spain, Catalonia and other regions. One, a bit controversial question to you as Italian. Are you afraid that there are some movements in Italy that will still want to divide Italy north and south? Is it possible? That kind of movements have some political and social power. More than the fact that some movements can try and divide Italy north and south, this is a dynamic that probably will come because north and south of Italy already had a long-standing, let's say, division in terms of culture, productive, economic situation, which has never been tackled seriously. Of course, when you have a crisis, all this explodes. And if you keep on not investing in the south, but giving, for instance, money as we we have witnessed the fact that the government has given the so-called reddito di cittadinanza, which is, let's say, a minimum sum of money to people unemployed. And this has been going on in different ways for so many years in the south. Well, of course, the north of Italy will be more attracted by the Middle Europa, let's say, productive system, because in terms of culture and in terms of production needs, this is much more, Lombardy and Veneto are much more near to the Middle Europa than they are to the south of Italy. So we could probably, yes, if things get worse, we could probably have a big problem in keeping the unity of Italy, but not because I don't think that it would be a problem of a movement. The Lega, for the moment, is not on this position, but I don't think that this could happen just as a consequence of facts. Gabriele, Italy does not have an industrial policy or even a
Hai detto
policy.
anche tu comunque. Hai detto anche tu.
If it does not change rapidly, the North will say, that's what will remain tied to Germany and the South will end in misery. This does not mean that there will be two states or two continents if we can't introduce a problem. Of course, as what I said before, the problem is that the South has a very low industrial policy. There's no industrial policy of the South. It's been the last decisions on industrial policy in the South are related to the end of the 60s, start of the 70s, which is a long time ago. Nothing has been done in the meantime. And the criminality power has grown in some south of the region, and which is a mix with also with many, let's say, parties which are involved in order to get votes with criminality. And this, of course, is not having an industrial policy or having a perspective. This is only a way of getting out of the market and out of Europe, really.
More questions?
There's one question. We told about general economic issues. Also, we have lots of information in Polish media that pandemic caused the economic problems in Italy. But do you personally see the problem in your country? In Poland, I think low interest rates and high inflation forces people to spend money. Also, cheap money can cause economic problems in future. Well, yes, as I said before, there's many economic problems in Italy because we had economic problems from the start. We already had a very low GDP increase. It was 0.1% in January. Now we are losing 45% of industrial production in these 3 months. We have lost. These are dramatic figures, and until now, people have been not been, let's say, fired because there's a system which is called cassa integrazione. That means that the state injects money to pay salaries to people which are not really working. It's not the entire salary, it's about 70-75%. But these measures have a timeline. In August and September, these measures will end, and it will be very difficult for these people to keep their job. So I personally see a big problem in Italy, a very huge problem. Then there's one in Polish, but I'm sorry, but I don't understand Polish. Gabriele, according to WTO economists, the three countries that will be massacred by crisis are Italy, Spain, and Greece. In proportion, Italy more. Yes, I agree. For the reasons I said before,
Mhm.
Italy will be the first victim of the consequence of the crisis. And the fact is that I don't think that even now there's among people there's a perception of this. It doesn't seem to me that people really understand the terms of what will happen in the next months, especially because the government is trying in all ways to, of course, to deceive the population. For instance, the initiative which they have launched this weekend, the General States of Economy, in which they have invited the Troika, fundamentally, to Rome, is just a show, a big show which has been put up in order to make Italians understand that there will be a recovery. But if Italy should change radically, it should change on 360 degrees. And I don't see any possibility that this will happen in the near future. If it doesn't change 360 degrees, Italy will be facing collapse. And of course, this collapse will also be a big negative factor on the whole of Europe. This is clear. That is why I think Germany are speeding up in order to get resources and try to save Italy, of course, because if Italy goes down, this will be a big, huge problem for the whole euro area. Changing in what way? Well, changing in a way that we do not have a economic policy. We have parties which are absolutely corrupt, which have, let's say, employment in some areas is not true employment, has been fueled by the fact that the parties have made their, let's say, the employment, their personal employment, and put people in the public administrations, for instance, which were not really needed. The bureaucracy is absolutely enormous. It's always been a big obstacle to a modern economy. There's no the fiscal policy is absolutely appalling. The taxation is very high. Taxation is high for autonomous workers. It's high for subordinate workers, and it's very high also for companies. So in this way, no growth is possible. So you should change the whole system. Continua questo rumore in cuffia, terribile. Is it possible that faraway big countries of former third world like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Bangladesh will increase their position in global politics in time of pandemic, or they will remain the current status quo? Well, they probably will.
E non ti si sente più Juan Giancarlo?
Faccio un rumore terribile.
Così sì.
Yeah, possibly they will increase their position, but I don't see them. I mean, we're not talking about the big players in the whole international arena. I mean, I don't think that they really are relevant in what we are talking about, which essentially is a multipolar world in which US and China are more or less in a different way, in a different, of course, historical view, but they're still trying to reply what was the USSR, let's say, duopolio. On the other hand, we have Russia, which is very far away from being a world power, of course, and then we have Europe. And if Europe, it depends on what Europe does in the next years, it could become a big power or implode. Gabriele, in any case, economies based on family savings and private initiative are especially under threat. Yes, because Italy has always been based on this family economy, especially very small enterprises, but and a very high rate of savings and property and private initiative. But these are the sectors which are being hit by the crisis and the ones which are suffering. If you go now in the center of Rome for a walk, you will notice that apart from the reopening of the monuments and all the beauties that we have in our city, the restaurants and bars, at least 50% are closed. And the other 50%, there's about 2 or 3 clients inside. And this means that there's no business going on. This means that these small economy-based enterprises will fail very rapidly. Not to mention that, of course, tourism will be hit in Italy, which is a big income, of course, for this country. But if this summer, of course, as it will have a reduction of tourism, especially from the US or China or the Asiatic countries, which are the big spenders. Of course, this will also create even more negative consequences on the GDP.
More questions?
There's a question saying, according to economists, Poland is one of the winning economic changes and will be third economic force in Europe. But our economic plan is based on China model economy. Few very big corporations, as Orlen and Kina, which are controlled by state. What do you think about that kind of economic policy? Okay, I mean, I remember that Poland, when they got in the European Union, was much more US-oriented economically. No collective agreements, only contract at the group level, a very, let's say, liberalistic approach, and which is more or less the China model. I mean, it's not very different. Yeah, okay, the state can intervene, okay. But the problem is not even if you're the third economic force in Europe, this does not, let's say, change the fact that if Europe as a whole can gain from this opportunity a global weight, everybody will gain. If Poland is going to gain inside a very, let's say, in a Europe which is not strong, I don't really see the difference in terms of perspective. Because even if you can say that Italy is going down, France is going up, Poland is going up, Norway is better than Sweden. Okay, but this is really an economic point of view, which is interesting to a certain extent. The problem is not only economic, of course. You will always be, let's say, more or less dependent on either China, either US. That is the problem.
More questions? Okay. Giancarlo, ti sei... Parla un attimo? Ok. Non so, che facciamo? Salutiamo?
Direi sì, a questo punto.
Okay, thank you very much for the attention. And I don't know, probably we organize one more on July, maybe. What is possible solution for Italy? Are we gonna go to bankrupt without any chance? Yes.
No, I hope not, of course. I hope not. I think that, of course, in a European perspective, this will not be possible, and this will not be, of course, allowed by Europe, luckily enough.
No, in realtà non andiamo verso la bancarotta,
No.
andiamo verso la distruzione di svariate fasce sociali.
Esatto.
Andiamo verso la modernità, tranquilli, la postmodernità. So, thank you very much. And okay, so maybe on July we organize another one. Anyway, otherwise, after the Landscanet encampment, we think to organize one monthly anytime. Okay.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.
Bye.